So in the book, you mentioned that there's four case studies which the book is centered around, and I would love if you could give a breakdown of what is focused on within one of those case studies, and one of the technologies that you cover that is most compelling there.
Yeah, in the book we try to cover all the different ways you can integrate novel health technologies into the health system. Some of them can be profitable. Some of them are maybe just more about social impact or driving impact and driving change. So I think that definitely the one I'd like to talk about, because it's way more my style, because I'm, perennially broke. it's not about making money for me. But one of the examples that I touch on is working as part of a social good organization. And one of the projects that has been a real highlight in my career was working with a group called Not Impossible Labs. So the project I touch on in that particular in the book is really about, we needed a solution to an issue that was happening in Sudan, where we had a bunch of kids who were missing limbs as a result of a terrible civil war that was going on, and there were constant bombings, and there was one beat up old hospital in the middle of it all that was trying to provide care to these single and double and sometimes triple amputees, and they had no access to prosthetic devices, but they also had no access to anything else. This hospital had been cut off in every way that you could imagine, because the warlord that was leading things, who thankfully has since been deposed, Bashir, was cutting off access. This was just the way warfare was being done, to make sure that the hospital had no way of serving their population. So we had to get creative with a solution. I was fortunate enough to meet two really amazing folks, Mick Ebeling and Elliot Kotek, who pulled me into the fold and said, okay, how do we build a prosthetic from trash, like from anything we got lying around? We started tooling around with that, and we really got to the point where we understood that this hospital was so isolated, there was no way that we were going to get anything in, or we were going to be able to use anything that was around. Like we had a couple of Skype calls with the and yes, it was Skype back then, with the head of the hospital, and we kept thinking that we had the greatest idea, and we were like, Coke bottles. Everyone's got Coke bottles. No Coke bottles. Wood, fabric, they were out of everything. So we said, okay, we can't build from what we've got, so we need to do something additive. So 3D printing was just becoming a thing back then. And so we pulled together a bunch of designers, and myself as a physical therapist, we started planning out how to build a 3D printed prosthetic. And we finally had a design that we really liked, and we tried it out a bunch of times. It seemed to work okay. And so we sent a team out into the middle of a war zone. They sort of airdropped in, got snuck across the border, the South Sudan border from North Sudan, and made it into the hospital, set the kit up, taught the locals how to build the prosthetics and how to print. Within about a week and a half of being there, the kid who kicked all of this off, this young boy named Daniel, who had been picked up by a Time magazine reporter, showed up to the hospital, tried on his two prosthetics, and fed himself for the first time in 3 years with his new prosthetics, which is pretty awesome. Then the community came in, learned how to build, and started building one prosthetic a week for one patient. And that was an incredible project. What was especially amazing from that project, was that we took those plans that we initially made, we threw them on, at the time it was called the Thingiverse, for all the projects that you would put on a MakerBot platform. And we, everything being open source, like the community came around and built way better prosthetics, but everyone sort of harkened back to that one design that we put up on open source and said this was the inspiration. And now, there's companies that do 3D printed prosthetics and make a good living of it. But it was one of the first designs out there, first designs available. And it just showed how when you do this sort of crisis-based innovation, and you create something and you don't worry about money, you just put it out there, it can give people permission to do more. And then suddenly you can sort of spark a bit of a movement. And so that's a favorite project of mine, just because of the level of seeing Daniel feed himself was one thing, but seeing 100,000 prosthetics made with this core design was, quite another, and that was quite cool.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.